this the dagger?
G'day guys, JB here. And while the end of the regular season has occurred, it means it's time for one thing. And that is the awards and the winners and the elite teams of the 23-24 NBA season. Of course, I will start this with my traditional MVP countdown. And then we'll wrap it up, of course, with my All-NBA teams, my other award winners, my Rookie of the Year, Coach of the Year, Defensive Player of the Year, Most Improved, Sixth Man of the Year award. I don't do Clutch Player of the Year, overrated type of award there, considering this year, especially when you look at the fact that two of the nominations aren't actually playing in the postseason. For me, if you really want to look at Clutch Player, look at guys that come up big in the fourth quarter overall, look at guys that led their team to wins, factor in all of these different moments. Clutch isn't just the fourth quarter either. When your team's down and needs a run or needs a basket, who was the guy that went to it? Really simple stuff for me. I'll also go through my All-NBA teams, my All-Defensive teams, as well as my All-Rookie teams. So without further ado, we will do the usual. We will start with the MVP race. For the 23-24 NBA season, and of course the qualifiers, we've known them all year. You've got to play 65 games. You've got to have your team in playoff contention. You can't be traded. And ultimately, you need to be leading your team to wins. Your numbers will eventually back that up, regardless of how good or indifferent they are to others who are perceiving them. Ultimately, it does come down to those four factors to me. Are you going to be playing consistent games? Are you leading your team to wins? Is your team in playoff contention? And on top of that, are you not being talked about in a trade, or have you not been traded on the season? So without further ado, we'll start with our first honourable mention. And this is a guy that was really consistent on both ends of the floor. I was pretty shocked that he wasn't nominated for finalist of Defensive Player of the Year. Of course, a very, very, very good help defender. And he's a good individual defender, and that's Anthony Davis of the Los Angeles Lakers there. The Lakers finishing 8th in the West, currently locked in a round one battle with Nikola Jokic and the Denver Nuggets. Davis on the year, 24.7 points, 12.6 rebounds, 3.5 assists, 1.2 steals and 2.3 blocks on 2.1 turnovers, 55.6 from the field, 27.1 from deep and 81.6 from the free throw line. He played in 76 games, averaged 35.5 minutes in those contests. Over the 76 games, the Lakers went 45-31, and he was responsible for me for 23 of those wins. There's no doubt about it. This is one of the three best years of Anthony Davis's career for me. And I think it does speak a lot around what was with him, where the elite level of a second option currently sits in their stage of career as well, and what you really need to put around guys like Anthony Davis at this point in their career. Of course, the big thing at the moment is, because he is not as big as other genuine bigs, the one-on-one defensive game for Davis does become a bit of a factor, but you're talking two or three more guys in the league that really cause an issue there. Your Sabonis's, your Embiid's and your Jokic's. Nurkic can be a bit of an issue, but Nurkic not having the ball in hand as much means that Davis certainly can roam a little bit more defensively on that front there. Of course, playing with LeBron James, LeBron had a really consistent, well, I wouldn't say a consistent season, but he had a nice season. Everything factoring in a really good season. And we're talking about a guy in quote-unquote year 21, now the all-time leader in points scored at any level of pro basketball on the planet. So, you know, Davis with a really good second option there. It's just a matter now of what can the Lakers try and do in this first round matchup. At the time of recording, down 1-0. But a nice year for Davis, certainly the best he's had in a Laker uniform since the championship win of 2019-20. And before that, you're looking back at the 17-18 year against the Pelicans, where he finished third in MVP voting. For me, could make a really good case he was the MVP that season as well. But a nice year for Anthony Davis, and hopefully we'll see him rewarded both All-NBA and All-Defensive honours there as well. The other honourable mention goes out in the West as well, and that's to Steph Curry, the Golden State Warriors. Ultimately, the big reason for both of these guys not being among the list, it's really simple. It's where they seeded. At the end of the day, I can't have guys that are barely making the playoffs or guys that don't make the playoffs in the MVP conversation. Now, I can certainly have them All-NBA and All-Defensive level of conversation. That's a completely different kettle of fish for me. But a really, really nice season from Steph. 26.4 points, 4.5 rebounds, 5.1 assists, 0.7 steals, 0.4 blocks, less than 3 turnovers there at 2.8. Honestly, there was a dip in the shooting, but I don't think that was really the overall issue. I'm sure plenty of people have seen enough of Golden State to know that Steph having a dip in his shooting numbers wasn't the reason for their season. 45% from the field, 40.8 from deep, 92.3 from the free throw line. Steph a consistent 49% guy from the field, so has taken a dip. This is a guy who's 35, who's carrying more weight than a lot of more weight on the shoulders as far as expectations and team than a lot of guys in the league. So he's still putting up a bit of effort there, but a really, really tough one there for Steph. 74 games played, 32.7 minutes, 43 and 31 in that time frame there with 26 wins. And I want you to use that comparatively there against someone like an Anthony Davis. He's played 2 less games than Davis. He's played roughly just shy of 3 minutes less than Davis. He's 2 wins less than Davis and as far as a team record, and he's 3 more wins better as an individual. Yet here we are praising the Lakers and praising other team members. I mean, comparatively there as well for other guys, I can say that he led comparatively better win-loss records as an individual than my next two players that are certainly going to be in the conversation of my MVP. He also had more individual wins against another guy that's in this race here. So really, I think if you're going to stack that kind of number and that sort of consideration up against Steph Curry, then you're really looking at a nice productive year. Again, the Warriors not there. It's going to be interesting next year how they look, but a really nice year for Steph. I think he's going to get All-NBA honours somewhere along the line as well. That'll be second or third team. But don't sleep on the year that Steph Curry had purely for the performance there of the Golden State Warriors. I think it's something that needs to be mentioned as well. Moving on to number 10 in the MVP race for 23-24, and I finished at Kevin Durant of the Phoenix Suns, who finished 6th in the West. Durant, 27.1 points, 6.6 rebounds, 5 assists, 0.9 steals, 1.2 blocks on 3.3 turnovers. Durant nearly a 50-40-90 season. At one point there, it looked like he may go 50-50-90. That was just heading to the All-Star break there. 52.3 from the field, 41.3 from deep, and 85.6 from the free throw line. Scary to think he wasn't even the best 3-ball shooter on his team this year. There was a lot of offensive relief, there's no doubt about it, and I think it's fair to say that Kevin Durant has played his best basketball when he has had that elite offensive relief around him, whether that was when Russell Westbrook was really up and firing, whether that was playing with Steph and Clay, whether that is now playing with a Devin Booker and a Bradley Beal and, stretching the floor there, a Grayson Allen as well. That's when Durant's played his best ball, when he's able to go one-on-one. I mean, why wouldn't he be? He's a 7-footer that can elevate in the jumper. But a really nice year for him, certainly comparable to the minimum amount of games he played last year. 75 games played this year, 37.2 minutes, 44 and 31 record for 23 wins, being the best player in. So again, you want to drag that back to the Steph Curry conversation. You want to drag that back to the Anthony Davis conversation. Can make a genuine case there that those guys, if you really wanted to, I could really push the envelope and say that Anthony Davis was probably top 10 in the MVP consideration there. But I do have to factor in seeding. I do have to factor in, general ability when the times really get tough. And the one thing that Durant does have, certainly on both of those guys, is just a more complete offensive game to be able to get back onto a level pegging there. So a nice season there for Kevin Durant. As far as the importance to the team, that's another factor as well. I do still feel that Devin Booker is the most valuable player for that Phoenix Suns team. I think Kevin Durant was their best player this season, but if you want to talk about true value for the team, that Phoenix Suns squad does not run the same without Devin Booker doing his thing, whether he's running the 2, whether he's running the 1, whether he's leading the scoring, whether he's really motivating teammates there. Bradley Beal had a nice pinch-hitting season. Again, I've mentioned Grayson Allen before. Nurkic playing that point centre as well. You're going to see him, Sabonis and Jokic really continue to mix it up. And someone like a Nurkic, if he was able to really get his feet under him and get more touches, I think the offense runs better, and I think you see Nurkic further up the better player list for their respective teams. But a nice year for Kevin Durant. I think you're going to see him All-NBA. Whether that's second or third team, I don't know. We'll get to that a little later, how I feel it'll be. But an All-NBA year for Kevin Durant, the top 10 finish for me in the MVP race. Finishing number 9 for me, though, Tyrese Halliburton of the Indiana Pacers. They finished 6th in the East, and Halliburton was one of the best pure point guard seasons that we've seen, probably since a very, very prime Chris Webber there in New Orleans. 20.1 points, 3.9 rebounds, 10.9 assists, the league leader in assists for the season, 1.2 steals and 0.7 blocks. But it's the efficiency in which he gets those assists and produces the offense there for Indiana. We're talking about a guy that has 2.3 turnovers a game on the season, just under 48% from the field, 47.7 there, not bad for a smaller guy, 36.4 from deep, has a bit of consistency, can be streaky, but it has some consistency from deep. And 85.5 from the free throw line. Anything better than 80% is really, really nice regard. 85 and above is an absolute bonus. So really good production offensively there. 69 games played. That is a little bit of a case study there for Haliburton. So his availability wasn't as ideal. Certainly better than last year, where he did show glimpses last year that this was going to happen, but did have those injury concerns. Did miss a bit of time. 32.2 minutes, so nice, productive, high pace, high possession basketball. 40 and 29 record. So again, we're talking about comparative here with other guards. Led to 24 wins. The other big thing that also hurts Tyrese Haliburton, adding in some of those other factors, I do not think that he has been their best player since Pascal Siakam arrived. For me, that's been Pascal Siakam. And I think some of the key evidence in that as well, again, we're recording after each team has played one round of the playoffs. Tyrese Haliburton isn't necessarily designed to be the guy to lead you to a title without some really nice pieces around him. And that's been the same for pretty much every elite pure point guard in the history of the game outside of Magic Johnson who adapted. You look at Isaiah Thomas. Isaiah Thomas was not going to be an elite level point guard that was going to be the absolute man without some really nice firepower around him. And that's just a fact. Mark Aguirre wasn't a scrub. Vinnie Johnson wasn't a scrub. Joe Dumars certainly wasn't a scrub. You want to look at Bob Cousy. Him and Bill Sharman ran the floor plenty for Boston in the early 50s. There was no doubt about their breakneck pace. But they couldn't win a playoff series. Really good pure point guard. John Stockton, another excellent example of a pure point guard. Tim Hardaway, another example of a pure point guard. 20 points, 10 assist kind of guys. But you do need to have that ability to score. And while there is plenty of value in that table setting, you still need the guy to execute. And that's been really key here for Indiana, particularly when you consider how much Siakam has done. I thought Siakam finished, leading that team to 17, leading any team that he played in. So total wins at 17 there for Siakam. And to be quite honest with you, I gave 10 of them when he was in Indiana, only 7 of them with Toronto. Really turned things around and really helped put the Pacers back on track, particularly after the Haliburton injury. But there's no doubt about it, Haliburton was the best player on that team this year. Haliburton really breaking out, showing some really good consistency. And this is a guy that's going to really make a splash for all NBA teams for years to come. There's no doubt about it. Again, you've got to factor in the weight of his presence there in the back half of the season, how many games he's played. He's barely ticked over the minimum, but an all-NBA team coming the way for Tyrese Haliburton, you would think this year. Really nice finish for him. He finished 9th in my MVP race. Over to number 8, and this is probably going to annoy a few people, but I have Jalen Brunson of the New York Knicks. Now, a lot of people are feeling Brunson needs to be a lot higher, and I can certainly see the reasoning for it. You're talking about a guy here who's playing in New York, who's got them to the second seed, who's got them to 50 wins, who did it without his best player. A lot of pressure on him, a lot of talk in the media about him. All fair factors. But based on what my criteria is, he doesn't meet that level. He's played really well. There's no doubt about that. I've got no reason to believe Jalen Brunson's not going to be All-NBA second-team lock. But for me, it has to be an All-NBA second-team lock at the very worst. I don't get picky about where a player's going to land, but realistically, I can't see more than 10 players being ahead of Jalen Brunson this season. As far as eligibility, I don't see more than 10 players being ahead of Jalen Brunson this season. That's the level that I think Jalen Brunson's been at. There's no doubt about it. Definitely All-NBA second team. And why not? He's just put together one of the best seasons for the Knicks in the last 25 years. Certainly, you can make a case the most impactful season by a Knick player since Patrick Ewing, almost 30 years ago, back in 94. Now, of course, Patrick's knees gave out. Patrick's legs give out. He did everything but win him a championship, particularly on a team that, while they were pretty good, realistically, if you want to look at it overall, they're not a playoff team without Patrick Ewing. Brunson, he's been the heart and soul. He's a true New York basketball player. He showed that in the very first game, and I keep harping back to it. The very first game the Knicks played with Jalen Brunson, taking the charge, forcing OT, wanting the big moments. He was no different again this year. 28.7 points, 3.6 rebounds, 6.7 assists, 0.9 steals, 0.2 blocks on 2.4 turnovers. So really efficient for a smaller guy. 47.9 from the field, so tick under 48% there. He was more efficient from the field than Tyrese Haliburton. He was better from deep than Tyrese Haliburton at 40.1%. An 84.7 from the line, smidgen under. But for me, was available more, had a little bit more pressure on, was clearly the man. At no point did you sit there and go, oh, geez, I don't know. I mean, Julius Randle really did keep up a pace, but at the end of the day, when Julius Randle had bad games, Jalen Brunson could step up and they could get the win. when Jalen Brunson had a bad game, it didn't matter if Julius Randle stepped up. There's a real big difference there on that one. He played 77 games, 35.4 minutes, 49 and 28 record. I don't know why I've got that there. That would be just games played. I know the Knicks won 50. So realistically, Brunson's played in all but one win for the Knicks this year. And if you really want to be pedantic about it, what's that? A 1-4 record without him. So, yeah, you tell me how that looks there for New York. 25 wins there for Jalen Brunson. Again, a top 10 finish for the season. I think he's had a tremendous year. He's going to continue to be a really bright light shining for New York. Do they get another piece around him? I don't know. That New York team's really starting to fill up with some New York-style basketball players, not only from the way they play and the way the game is, in a sense, but certainly what the fans are going to appreciate. Hard workers who get the job done. You know, they do have a little bit of flamboyance about them, but it's in the right way. And that's not to say they don't showboat, but they're passionate. And they're passionate and controlled and bring that energy to the crowd in the game. And they really don't showboat and try and make it all about themselves. So Brunson, a massive year for the Knicks. As I said, led them to second in the East, led them to 50 wins. Probably the most impactful season we've seen from a Knicks player, as I mentioned, dating back to the Patrick Ewing years. I know there were moments here or there, but certainly from an impact standpoint, a really nice season there. So number 8 in the MVP race for 23-24 for me, Jalen Brunson of the Knicks. Heading to number 7, this will be one that a lot of people will disagree with, but it's very hard to deny the impact that Paolo Banchero has had for the Orlando Magic this year. They finished 5th in the East and he's 7th in my MVP race for the year. 22.6 points, 6.9 rebounds, 5.4 assists, 0.9 steals and 0.6 blocks, 3.1 turnovers a game to go with that. Now, you are going to look at the efficiencies. You're going to look at the lower scoring end. I get it. This guy's in his second season with a team that's essentially been together for 2 years and a bunch of young guys who the majority of have played less than 5 NBA years. 45.5 from the field, 33.3 from deep, 72.5 from the line. Played 80 games, 46 and 34 record in those games, averaged 35 minutes and led them to 27 wins. And might I add that the only reason that Paolo Banchero isn't higher, and this is where a lot of the factor of where did your team finish and how did you play, the only reason he's not higher is pretty much because, well, his team didn't win as many games. And they had a really nice team. They've got a really nice team. And you've got to remember, and I harp on this all the time because people don't seem to appreciate how good a young squad is when they do something like this. They started 5-20 in 22-23, and they've essentially been a 500 team since. And that's paid off to the point now where we're looking at a playoff side. 46 and 34 record. In their second year, Banchero needed to step up. This Orlando team would not be anywhere near the postseason if Paolo Banchero didn't step up at one point during the season and go, you know what, we need a leader. We need someone at the front. We need the head of the snake. We need someone that's going to, have that first attack, who's going to be that first line. That's going to be me. And that's exactly what Banchero did. Franz Wagner, really, really nice year as well. They've got some good contributing pieces. They're a well-coached unit. They're a good defensive unit. They're accountable. They don't let their ego get in the way. They let their basketball do the talking. And it's indicative of their second-year leader doing this stuff. I think Paolo Banchero has secured himself a max extension based off this season alone. It's been massive for him. And he's only going to get better. You've got to remember, this is a guy who's in his second season. 22.6 points, 6.9 rebounds, 5.4 assists on the year, around at 23, 7 and 5. Second year, leading his team to the playoffs. They're going to be in a nice little heads-up battle there with Cleveland. So that's going to be an interesting first-round matchup. But at the end of the day, the expectation on Orlando isn't to win this playoff series. When you really want to look at the pressure of expectation, it's on Cleveland, especially with a lot of talk being, again, that they're going to bust this team up. I don't see it. I think you need to really factor in injuries. I think you need to factor in chemistry. And I think you give this Cleveland team at least one more year to at least put it all together, get a core group playing 65 games and show what they can do, because there's no doubt that Cleveland's a top 3 team in the East, along with Milwaukee, along with Boston when they're really up and firing, competing against Philadelphia, competing against New York. The East can be really, really entertaining. I mean, both conferences right now, it's a really competitive marketplace. You've only got to look at sides like Memphis, who were a top 3, top 4 team last year. All of a sudden, now with injuries, are looking like the worst team in the league. It's a really fickle coverage of the game. It's a really reactive league right now, but I genuinely feel that for Orlando, you need to give this a few more years. You need to be patient, and I think that any modicum of success to be measured this year is the fact that this Orlando team in their second season with their leader has managed to make the postseason. They will only get better. They can only get better. And same with Banchero. He's been a massive, massive reason for the success of this team. That's why I've got him 7th in my MVP race for 23-24. Moving up to number 6, and this is a guy who just missed the cut for my top 5. And it's really tough for me to not have him there, but I also can't justify having him above anyone else that is in this list. So Anthony Edwards comes in at number 6 in my MVP race for 23-24. Third in the West for the Minnesota Timberwolves, the clear-cut leader of that team, averaging 25.9 points, 5.4 rebounds, 5.1 assists, 1.3 steals and 0.5 blocks on 3.1 turnovers. 46.1 from the field for a shooting guard that really tried to hone his outside craft this year. Was certainly more of a jump shooter than he was attacking the rim compared to other years, might I add. That doesn't mean he totally revamped his game, but there was a clear focus on the perimeter side of his game. 35.7 from deep, 83.6 from the free throw line. Not a great defender, a passable defender, a good defender. 79 games played, 35.1 minutes in those games. Minnesota went 54-25 with him in the squad, and I had him responsible for 27 of those 54 wins. Anthony Edwards with another monster year. People slept on Anthony Edwards last year, and I pointed this out before, and I'll point it out again. People slept on Anthony Edwards last year for the simple fact that the main focus was, do we blow up this Minnesota team? Do we trade Rudy Gobert? Is Karl Anthony Towns worth all that money? He's injured. Do we let go of him? Can we trade him? At no point did anyone look at Minnesota and go, well, Anthony Edwards has really stepped up to the plate. Well, Anthony Edwards is showing he can be a number 1 guy. Hey, maybe this is actually Anthony Edwards' team. And you had flashes of that conversation, but certainly not to the extent that we've had this year following the Team USA campaign that Edwards had. You know, and it's rewarded him. He's going to the Olympics, as he should. There is a genuine case that he is the best shooting guard in the United States. A genuine case. And based on this year, depending on what you're going to play as a point guard, depending on what you're going to play as a shooting guard, you can make a case that he's the second best shooting guard in the NBA. A guy later on in my list has that number 1 nod. Hint, hint, where he may sit on the list. But a massive year for Anthony Edwards, a guy that really managed to develop his game, a guy who's been the captain of this team, that's revamped itself, that's rebuilding itself, has a really defensive focused mind right now. But it's got pieces left, right and centre. It's got a great second unit. It's got great second and third options. It's got a great leader defensively. They're really ticking a lot of boxes. Ultimately, they finished 3rd on record. They were 1 game off top spot. Anthony Edwards was the crux for that there and managed to still get this done and still finish 1 game off top spot without Karl Anthony Towns being there for a considerable amount of time. Otherwise, I think you're looking at a 60-win Minnesota team. And you may be looking at someone a little higher up on the list at that point. So a really nice year for Anthony Edwards. Another standout season. You would think All-NBA second team at worst. Massive year. And looks like Minnesota are going to be making a little bit of noise there in the postseason as well. So a big year for Anthony Edwards. Of course, it is a regular season award. I do have him at number 6. The guy I have at number 5, this will probably annoy a few people, but it's not factoring in where the team finished, because realistically, if you're going to look at things and just base it around, well, how did the team go, then this man would be number 1. Jason Tatum, though, comes in at number 5th for me for the Boston Celtics. He is on the best team he's ever been this year. But for me, there is still no debate that he is clearly the best player on the best team in basketball. And that does have to account to something in the end. You do still have to perform. And that's one thing I can at least say for Tatum. He has performed. Now, based on how I voted for things last year, I can make a case Jason Tatum was the MVP of the NBA. Didn't have a great playoff run. I don't think many people would disagree with that. But a lot of people held the previous year's finals performance against him. And again, I get it. I understand it. I don't agree with it. At the end of the day, it's based on the regular season, and he had a mammoth regular season. No questions asked about that whatsoever. 26.9 points, 8.1 rebounds, 4.9 assists. A rounded 27, 8, and 5 as the man on that Celtics team. Of course, defensively there, you're looking at 1 steal and 0.6 blocks a game, less than 3 turnovers, 47.1 from the field, 37.6 from deep, and 83.3 from the free throw line. So you're talking about a wing player who's going to give you 27, 8, and 5, less than 3 turnovers, 47 from the field, rounded 38 from deep, and over 83% from the free throw line. There's no question as to just how good he was this year. 57-17 record in games he played. He played 74 of them. 35.7 minutes. I had him at 27 wins. The best of the 3 there in Banchero, Edwards, and Tatum. And I think if you're going to rank it honestly, you have to put it Tatum, Edwards, and Banchero, 1 through 3. And everyone's going to ask the question, well, Porzingis is huge for them defensively. Obviously. I don't know anyone that's going to debate that. You would have to be blind to debate that. Derek White with an all-defensive season, in my opinion. Drew Holiday still consistently contributing. Jaylen Brown with an all-NBA season. That's the kind of level he played at. At one point, he had kind of surpassed for a brief moment there. Tatum had a bit of a slump, and there are other things you've got to factor in as well. Tatum wasn't always the man this year. Now, if he was the man a little bit more, yeah, he might be a little bit higher on this list. There's no doubt about it. But he still had a big year. I don't think he was the MVP, but I certainly think he's in the All-NBA first team. And depending on what you're classing as a small forward and what you're classing as a power forward, you can make a case that Jason Tatum is the best small forward in the NBA. You can make a genuine case he's one of the 3 best forwards in the NBA. There's a guy later on that we need to talk about as far as what sort of perimeter presence do you class him as. There's another guy in here, what sort of forward presence do you class him as. But there's no doubt about it for me. Jason Tatum, one of the 5 best players in the league this year. The question does remain, where does that sit if everybody remains healthy? I don't think anyone's going to debate that there. But at worst, he's a top 10 player in the NBA. At worst. But I think you can make a case, a top 5 player in this league this year. All NBA first team honours going to Jason Tatum. The best player on the best team in basketball that cracked 60-plus wins again. For the 14th time, I do believe, in franchise history, which is an NBA record. Jason Tatum's the captain of that. They're in the best position they've been to win a championship, and he's leading that right now. I can't penalise him for that. There has to be a level of praise. And that's exactly what Jason Tatum's getting right now. So 5th for me in the MVP race there, Jason Tatum. Moving to number 4, an injury has essentially cost him a podium finish here for me. Giannis Antetokounmpo of the Milwaukee Bucks. The Bucks finished 3rd in the East. And Giannis, a historical season, the first player ever to average 30 on 60% shooting. 30.4 points, 11.5 rebounds, 6.5 assists, 1.2 steals, 1.1 blocks. And don't forget, ladies and gentlemen, this guy is all defensive. There's no doubt about it. He's still probably the best overall player on the planet. I don't think he was... Well, we'll soon find out, but I wouldn't necessarily rank him extremely high on the defensive end of the floor, but he's certainly there. There's no doubt about that. A massive season once again there for Giannis. 3.4 turnovers, relevant only in the fact that he does have a high possession rate. 27.4 from deep, relevant in the fact that he is taking them, so he needs to make them. 65.7 from the stripe, relevant in the fact that he is the main man. He is going to be fouled. They know that's a liability. 61.1 from the field on 30.4 points a game. That's ludicrous stuff. He's the only man in the history of the league to do it. It has to count for something. Of course, their record wasn't as great. They had a coach sacked. Their chemistry wasn't, a lock. They had injuries. And they still finished 3rd in the East. Injury has all but cost them the 2nd seed. Chemistry has all but cost them higher in the 2nd seed. It's now going to be a matter of what can this team do without Giannis' presence on the floor. You don't have a lot of games in Middleton. Lillard's now going to have to be your number 1. Porter's still coming off the bench. Where does Lopez fit in the equation? But they don't all fit together as well as when Giannis is on that floor. And I defy anyone to argue with me that on both sides of the ball, if you were picking a player right now in the NBA, you have to encompass all sides of the ball, that Giannis Antetokounmpo still wouldn't be the number 1 draft pick. And this isn't voter fatigue. There's no issue for me in saying this isn't voter fatigue. No one led their team to more wins as an individual last year than Giannis Antetokounmpo. but he didn't play enough games under my criteria to win it. But he had a massive year last year. He's had a slightly under-the-radar year this year. And again, it's because the Bucks didn't win as many games. But he's still producing elite efficiency offensively. And you've got to remember, we're talking about around 30, 12, and 7. So he's still diming the basketball. He's still getting plenty of facilitation options available around him. He's still drawing doubles to hit the open man. He's still penetrating down the lane with ease. The question will be whether he comes back with his injury at the moment. That'll be all factoring in the performance there of the Bucks, obviously. But you're not going to rush bringing him back if he's still going to be a top 5 player in the NBA. It doesn't make any sense. Of course, 73 games there for Giannis, 35.2 minutes, 45 and 28 record. And I had him as their best player in 32 wins. So 49 games won, 32 of them for me off the back of Giannis. For a bit of perspective on just what sort of season I felt he had there. Number 3, Giannis Antetokounmpo of the Milwaukee Bucks. Over to the podium. And this is a guy that made a very late run. A lot of people thought he may be the MVP, thought he may be second. Certainly, no lower than third. And of course, I'd like to point out I am very much justified in my MVP ladder, considering the 3 finalists are also my podium. Maybe the media did get it right. I don't know, but that's all based on preferences and total votes here at this point. Luka Doncic of the Dallas Mavericks managed to get Dallas up to 5th in the West, so clean into the playoffs, lifted his efficiency, led the league in scoring, has managed to get Kyrie Irving to stay on side, which is as big of achievement as anything statistically I'm about to talk about. And they've managed to cultivate a bit of a team around him as well that can be a bit more of a contender because they just have that ability on both sides of the ball now. The only question remains is how much ball in hand does this man still need to have in order for the team to have success? Because if it's going to be as much as he's showing right now, the team's not going to have that same amount of success. Luka on the season led the league in scoring at 33.9 points on 48.7 from the field, 38.2 from deep, and 78.8 from the free throw line. Luka's field goal percentage has grown. His three-point percentage has grown. It's the conversion efficiency-wise from the free throw line. Again, I want to see around 8 out of 10 there for Luka. That's a 34-point season. Massive, massive year. 9.2 rebounds and 9.8 assists to go with that, along with 1.4 steals and 0.5 blocks on 4 turnovers. A high usage rate that's going to see realistically, arounded 34, 9 and 10 on a rounded 49, 38, 79. He is the first man to average at least 33, 9 and 9. 32, 8 and 8, hell of a season, but it's not 34, 9 and 9. Or 33, 9 and 9. 32, 8 and 8 was rounded down. Based on your minimums. Now I know it's a different era, but that's a big stat line. That's a lot to overcome if you're in the MVP conversation. But again, I think the biggest achievement right now is you've managed to get a couple of pieces that are good defensively. You've managed to keep Kyrie Irving on side. He's ready for the postseason. He's a well-known playoff performer. You have a very good sidekick. But you need to get the ball out of your hands, and you need to get everyone touches in the postseason. Isolation basketball will not win you a championship. Isolation basketball has never won a championship. Anyone being an individual for a championship has never won it. That's just a fact. And it might be the big thing that's now holding Dallas back. Can they get a couple of more, people that can lock in defensively? Can they get a couple of more people that are good ball out of hand? Spot-up shooters, working off the ball, things of that nature. That will, 3-and-D guys that can do that will make Dallas a really tough team to contest against. But it is a matter of getting that ball out of Luka's hands. And don't get me wrong, the production ball in hand's great. I don't think anyone's going to deny the individual numbers are so good. But the individual numbers don't win you a championship. And considering he's heading into a max contract without an MVP, without a championship, okay, he's got the All-NBA first teams, but without a championship, without an MVP, he's walked into a $360 million deal. Pump the brakes. A massive year, though, for Luka. 3rd in my MVP race. Clearly the best season of his career so far. Over to number 2. He finished with silver, and he's very, very unlucky not to finish in first. And I thought there might have been a couple of wins there that Denver would take that they just didn't get. And I think ultimately it's cost him, for me, what would have been the MVP race, and that's Nikola Jokic. I think the media are going to vote for Jokic. I don't have a qualm with the media voting for Jokic. But I wouldn't be voting for Jokic. Denver was second in the West off Jokic's 26.4 points, 12.4 rebounds and 9 assists a game. Around a 26, 12 and 9 off 58.3 from the field, 35.9 from deep and 81.7 from the line. Or 26, 12 and 9 on 58, 36, 82 at 7 foot. Massive, massive numbers for Jokic, who has finished with the most assists in a season for a centre ever, which is ridiculous to think about. 1.4 steals, 0.9 blocks on 3 turnovers. The only person with as many as him is Wilt Chamberlain, another name that keeps popping up. Jokic played 79 games, 34.6 minutes, 55 and 24 record with him in the game, and 42 wins there. Ultimately, when you really want to look at it, it's just the fact that they didn't get those wins on the board, didn't get the runs on the board. And I'm going to go out on a limb here, I should say, based on how many games win-loss record comparison with the other player I'm going to mention next. Had they had won some of those games, the order of 1 and 2 is around the other way. It just would be. I can't really fault much of Jokic. He gets his teammates involved. He's an all-time elite offensive player. He's to the point where, you know, you read and react offensively and defensively from him, whether it's ball in hand, ball out of hand. He's the point centre of one of the biggest teams in the league who just do so much work for him, and he does so much work for them, and they reward each other equally on it. It's very hard to try and find... I mean, obviously defensively it's not great, but he's a lot more switched on and become a better team defender and a better help defender over the last 3 years. There's no doubt about that. Obviously, isolation one-on-one, you are going to see guys like Rashawn Holmes or Marvin Bagley play a good game against him. Of course you are. He's a little slower foot. He's 7 foot. The reactions still need to be a certain level. But they also have to guard him. And the outlier of what he produces offensively versus what he gives up defensively is night and day. And it's a massive factor as to why he's so dominant. I mean, I'll use the example of this very first playoff game against the Lakers. He causes fits for Anthony Davis. And then when he goes down the offensive end and they're forced to play Davis somewhere else, this guy's just getting mismatches in the post. And the most effective offensive play in the league for the last 2 years has been a Nikola Jokic post-up with a conversion rate greater of 70%. It's so ridiculous to try and comprehend without adding in the rebounding and the passing and getting everyone involved. Another massive year for Jokic. As I mentioned there, 79 games played, 34.6 minutes, 55 and 24 record for 42 wins. 55 and 24 record. Remember that for this next person that I'm about to bring up. That will ultimately show you where I sat with this. And ultimately, it was those couple of wins that not only probably determined the MVP, but probably determined the number 1 seed in the West. That's how minutely close it was across the board. Number 2, Nikola Jokic of the Denver Nuggets, and he's been leading the way in my MVP race for most of the year. Number 1, for me, the MVP of the 23-24 NBA season is Shai Gilgeous-Alexander of the Oklahoma City Thunder. Led that team to the first seed in the West, having not even played in the playoffs last year, and went ahead and had the most rounded season by a shooting guard since Dwayne Wade in 2009. Shai finished with 30.1 points, 5.5 rebounds and 6.2 assists, 2 steals and 0.9 blocks a game. I think you'll see him on both all NBA and all defensive teams. Here's where the freaky part comes into it. Shai averages around a 36 and 6, 2 steals and a block on a tick over 2 turnovers a game at 2.2. He shot 53.5 from the field, a respectable 35.3 from deep, and a crazy 87.4 from the free throw line. You wanted a guy who delivered his team wins, you got Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. You want a guy who's played games, you got Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. You want a team you want a guy who put his team in playoff contention. They went from out of the play-in tournament to the number 1 seed, brother. He ticks that box. And I can guarantee you he is not the trade talk. They've got Chet Holmgren, they've got Cason Wallace, they've got Lou Dort, they've got Williams, you name all of these guys. Josh Giddey, all of these guys that this OKC team has, and there's clearly one player who makes it tick. He marks every single box that anybody would want. The only issue is there isn't a narrative written about him and his game. If a narrative had been written, had been published, and there was a genuine story to work with, there's no doubt about it. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander is the MVP, and I'll go one step further. You get him into a market that's not small. Just get him into a medium to major market, and he's the MVP of the league. If he plays in Los Angeles, in New York, in Chicago, or Boston, he's the MVP of the league. I want to know what the crux is now, because if your argument is Jason Tatum's the best player in the NBA because he plays on the best, he's the best player on the best team, where's that against Shai Gilgeous-Alexander when he's the number 1 seed in the West? If you want a guy that gets it done efficiently offensively, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. The guy who hits the shot, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. The guy who plays D, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. The guy who makes his teammates better and continues to lift a really young and up-and-coming team, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. Oh, and led him to a playoff win today. And looks like that he could probably lead him to the first round. Of course, it does come to matchups, and there is a level where they ask about experience and maturity and things like that. Why are they the number 1 seed against someone like a Minnesota who's got an extremely elite star player with experience? Why are they ahead of Denver, who has an elite star player and plenty of championship experience? Why are they ahead of the Clippers? Why are they ahead of the Mavericks? Why are they ahead of the Suns? Why are they ahead of the Lakers? What are they doing sitting ahead of New Orleans? You cannot deny the success and the greatness of Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, who's been threatening to do this for a long, long time, who showed last year he can be All-NBA, and was, who showed plenty of times the reason for the success of the Oklahoma City Thunder was him, and it's proven it once again. There's a reason Jerry West didn't want to get rid of this guy. There's a reason that the Clippers didn't want to get rid of him. There's a reason they pitched him to Kawhi Leonard and Paul George. And he is just making everybody absolutely eat it for their decision. But there's no doubt about it. For me, the MVP of the 23-24 NBA season was Shai Gilgeous-Alexander of the Oklahoma City Thunder. Not necessarily everyone else's cup of tea, but certainly the player that I thought deserved the MVP. He'll get All-NBA. I think he probably gets an All-NBA second team nod as well. A really nice season there for Shai. Congratulations to everyone that has made that top 10 list. I think everyone deserves it. And I think we're going to see most of those guys sitting in All-NBA squads. Of course, we'll move on now to the other awards on the season and the other award winners. It was really tough for me, but I did go with Rudy Gobert as my Defensive Player of the Year for the Minnesota Timberwolves. The captain of the best defense in the league, showed how elite he was with a lot more freedom this year, particularly with the elite offensive play on that squad. The nice bench system that they've got going there in Minnesota. And it was clear early on that Gobert's rotations, that Gobert's ability to defend the man, rotate back into the paint. You've got to remember this is a different kind of game at the moment. It will probably change in the next 2 years, thanks to the man that is to the right of screen there. But I thought Gobert was the Defensive Player of the Year. And the other big factor is the fact that the guy who I've got as my Rookie of the Year, I don't think that needs any explanation, is the fact that his team didn't win 40 games. If the Spurs had been a 500 team, we're talking about Victor Wembanyama beyond the Rookie of the Year. We're talking about Victor Wembanyama beyond the Defensive Player of the Year. We're talking about Victor Wembanyama as a rookie being All-NBA first team. And I think he's going to be he's nominated for the Defensive Player of the Year. I think he's All-NBA. I think he's All-Defensive first team. There's no doubt about it. Wembanyama with a huge rookie year, the third best rookie year in Spurs history. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. You need to go and learn about Tim Duncan and David Robinson. But it was a phenomenal rookie year. It's certainly been the best rookie year I think that we've seen dating back to Tim Duncan. No, that's not trying to throw shade at anybody, but you need to look at the impact this guy's had. Wemby's legitimately going to force a rule change here in the NBA very, very soon. I don't say that lightly. I say that with pretty big confidence, to be honest with you. Most improved player for me, Tyrese Maxey, really took a step up. I know Embiid had a massive year, so it alleviated some things for him. I know guys like Şengün had a big year. Someone like a Kobe White had a big year. But if I really want to be frank with it as well, I can go through and all the guys that were nominated. Now, Şengün gets in on minutes. I didn't have Şengün playing 65 games, unfortunately. Otherwise, if 65 games was your qualifier there, I can make a genuine case that Şengün gets it. Now, I know there's these minutes things and this and that, but it's really crazy considering Dante DiVincenzo misses out on a nomination there by seconds. This is where the ludicrousness of this rule needs to be hard set. Don't worry about your minutes. Did you play 65 games? Really simple stuff. Don't complicate it. We're not trying to sort tiebreakers here. I just thought Maxey did lead his team to more wins. He did clearly have improved numbers. He did have more responsibility, which does help, but he clearly stepped up there. And for me, Naz Reid, Sixth Man of the Year. This is a guy who led Minnesota to wins at times. This is a guy who really stepped up and could fill that void as the number one defender on the floor or that number one scoring option on the floor, which is exactly what you want out of a six-man, a guy who can do both sides of the ball. And how can I really deny a guy who managed to get his name at WrestleMania in the crowd? Shout out there to Naz Reid, my most improved. So my other award winners, and I call them major award winners, Rudy Gobert of the Minnesota Timberwolves for Defensive Player of the Year, Victor Wembanyama for Rookie of the Year from the Spurs, Tyrese Maxey, the most improved player from the Philadelphia 76ers, and Naz Reid as the Sixth Man of the Year, having played for the Minnesota Timberwolves. Of course, my other one there is Coach of the Year, and it's not something I thought about too much. It didn't take much thought for me. It was pretty simple. Leading Orlando to a 47-35 record, keeping them above 500 for the last 18 months, but still being able to do it this year as well. It was really easy for me to nominate Jamal Mosley as the Coach of the Year. Of course, there's been better records. Of course, there's better man management. But when you want to look at a guy who has essentially instilled success on the court with the way that he has coached the team, with the way that he has presented a game plan on both sides of the ball, he's harnessing young talent, he's not watching them drive away, he's giving everyone their chance and their opportunity, particularly guys that you thought were going to go away, and their management of some of those guys as well, that could be getting more minutes, that are getting less minutes, but are still having the same sort of impact. But to me, it was a no-brainer. He's been really, really good for this team. He continues to show some success. They're rewarding him by being in the postseason. Now, of course, a lot of people are going to go, well, how can you justify that at 47 wins and a fifth seed? You've only got to look at the way this team plays. I mean, the second seed in the East finished with 50 wins. He's led a young team to 47, instilled a great defensive mindset, a great next-up mindset, developing the talent as well. Really good work there from Jamal Mosley, for me, the Coach of the Year. Now, as we do, we'll get into our All-NBA teams. We'll start with the All-Rookie second team. It was sort of tough. I mean, I still went with the 65 games there. Some of it was, what was your impact for the team? Did you lead your team? Was there anything that made you stand out in your class? What sort of impact did you have? It sort of made it a little bit easier as far as deciding who my top 10 rookies were. Of course, in the second team, Brandon Podziemski from Golden State became a really nice rotation there. Duke Reith, the Australian there, he'll be in our national team for the Olympics, but a really nice addition to Portland. Really earned his stripes. People need to really do a bit of reading up on Duke Reith. Had a really, really, really tough upbringing and has really worked his way to the league, and I think he's earned that just reward. Cason Wallace, a key rotation on that really successful Oklahoma City team. Jordan Hawkins, another guy who's been key in the rotation there for New Orleans, really stepping up, had him winning a couple of games for them, and really making the most of a real blended mix of talent and experience there in New Orleans. And Marcus Sasser, a nice year for Detroit as well. As hard as it is to say that anyone in Detroit had a nice year, it was a nice year for him. He was really trying to step up there, particularly with some of the inefficiencies and the worry that was coming through there for the Pistons. Over to the All-Rookie first team, and these guys were the layup selections for me. Of course, Rookie of the Year will be Victor Wembanyama of the San Antonio Spurs. Chet Holmgren for the Oklahoma City Thunder would have been the Rookie of the Year if it hadn't been for Wemby, and he had a really nice rookie year. It's really kind of crazy for me to kind of see that there, that people go, oh, geez, it wasn't much of a contest. No, when you've got an all-time generational talent leading the way against another all-time generational talent, and he just happens to have the best rookie year for the better part of 26 years, it's very hard to compete against. So that's no shade at Chet. That's just how good Wemby was this year. Brandon Miller, another one. You'd probably be talking about Brandon Miller's rookie year a little bit more if it hadn't been for Wemby and Chet coming in to combine with the way they've played. And a big shout out again, just quickly with Chet. Nice playoff debut there, 15, 11 and 5 blocks. Nice solid foundation for him. Brandon Miller, really nice there. I think they're going to be the guy that they have. He has to be the guy they focus on in Charlotte. You can't have a guy with banged up issues and another guy who's busy banging up. Anyway, we won't touch on that. When you've got those kind of guys on your team that just aren't as reliable and you've paid them big money, I think you need to just really put some focus into Brandon Miller. For me, there's no doubt that he's going to be pretty key for any success for Charlotte if they're going to have even a modicum of it going forward. Keontae George was a really nice addition there to Utah. Was really playing nicely when it looked like they were going to make a bit of a run. They just seemed to turn the Jets off. But I thought he had a really nice season. And Jaime Jaquez for Miami, I thought he had a really nice year. Surprised a lot of people, but I do feel that he certainly deserves to be on that all-rookie first team. Of course, moving on now to the all-defensive teams. And this one was really tough, and it's really interesting that one of the nominations for Defensive Player of the Year, he sits on the second team. I just couldn't do it. I know they're positionless, and if we're going to go positionless, I could probably make a case, but it's really tough for me with the all-defensive team to not have that certainly more position-based, because I think there's certainly a lot more relevance in defending by position, particularly when, you know, there are only a few elite level guards that are certainly guarding beyond their size there. So the all defensive second team for me, Bam Adebayo, a nice solid year, continued to be the best player for the Heat. Giannis Antetokounmpo, I don't think his numbers, you know, really spoke the volume of just how well he played, but it's very hard for me to justify that when you do have some other good pieces around you on the rotation. No doubt the captain of that team and the difference, but just don't think Giannis has had the same impact as he had in previous years. Herb Jones, really, really key for New Orleans, their best perimeter defender. Had a couple of games there where he was the man. But you've got to look at the impact. The reason that guys like Zion, Brandon Ingram, CJ McCollum have that freedom there offensively is because of the absolute dirty work that Herb Jones puts in on the defensive end. Jalen Suggs, for me, the best defender, not named Jonathan Isaac, and he was another guy that was just so tough not to get into this team. But Suggs, consistently the best defender for me all year, playing crucial minutes out on the perimeter in a perimeter-based game. He had a really, really nice year. So for me, I just have to put Jalen Suggs in the team. And Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, a lot of that comes down to, and it's a very similar situation with Giannis. You've got to look at the energy that's been expended on the offensive side of the ball to still be that elite defensively, and I think that does deserve some credit. It's very hard for me to sit there and, you know, not necessarily not rate exactly what's going on there with Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. So that's my second team. Again, do I think that you can probably justify a couple of other guys getting into that team? Yeah, of course you can. There's no doubt about it. Jonathan Isaac is a really, really key guy that you can make that case for as far as what his impact can be defensively. I think when you're going to look at someone like a Brook Lopez, the impact that he makes defensively is really key as well. But it's just so hard for me to try and narrow these down, and I just think that these were the guys. And I certainly think there's some other good defenders. You know, Chet Holmgren had another really good defensive year, but it's going to be very hard to sort of sit there and go, geez, does he make second team when Shai's been so outstanding on both ends of the floor and you're not going to win the Rookie of the Year? I think that becomes a bit of a conversation as well. They were some of the considerations I certainly had looking at that team. So again, my all-defensive second team, Bam Adebayo of the Miami Heat, Giannis Antetokounmpo of the Milwaukee Bucks, Herb Jones of the New Orleans Pelicans, Jalen Suggs of the Orlando Magic, and Shai Gilgeous-Alexander on the second team. Of course, the first team is the one that everyone wants to know about, and a bit of a fire light to be lit under the backside here, no doubt. I got my Defensive Player of the Year, Rudy Gobert of the Minnesota Timberwolves. Doesn't bear any explanation. I got Victor Wembanyama of the San Antonio Spurs. Would have been the Defensive Player of the Year if they won games. Doesn't bear any explanation. I got Anthony Davis, the Los Angeles Lakers. I think clearly their best defender, and a guy who at one point was really tracking as the Defensive Player of the Year. Certainly faded a little bit there, but still one of the elite players. And again, you want to look particularly from the standpoint there with Wembanyama, the elite level offensively that can be delivered there as well, while delivering that elite level defensive presence really does counter in a factor. I just think he's a better elite defender than the other guys at the moment in the second team.
Derek White, for me, consistently the best perimeter defender for Boston this year. He's been an absolute terror. Hard for me to have Holiday and Porzingis without the games, but Derek White's certainly the best defender on the best team over there in the East, and Caldwell-Pope consistently the best defender for Denver, and a guy that really hasn't received his flowers. Derek White's starting to get his flowers now because he's in a main market, but Caldwell-Pope, at one point there was a scapegoat for Los Angeles, despite the fact that he was clearly a big reason for the success defensively for that Laker team. They haven't been the same since. He fit right in with Denver. He pinch hits offensively. He's great defensively. He gets out in transition. He really disturbs. For me, he's had a really nice season, and that's what gets him on the all-defensive team for me. So, again, recapping the all-defensive first team. Rudy Gobert of the Minnesota Timberwolves, Victor Wembanyama of the San Antonio Spurs, Anthony Davis of the Lakers, Derek White of the Celtics, and, of course, Caldwell-Pope, KCP of the Denver Nuggets. Finally, into the All-NBA teams. Now, for anyone who has followed along and how I base everything on my ratings as far as leading your team to wins, being in contention, being on the floor, things of that nature, this is the ultimate testing ground of where all these guys line up. Seeding comes into it, but ultimately it's going to show you no one here, in my opinion, led their team to no less than 20 wins this season. They were in contention or contending. Some of them missed, but they did play the amount of games. So it does become a factor there. For me, starting from the very bottom and moving their way up, the 15th selection for my All-NBA teams, thus making the third team, Kawhi Leonard of the Los Angeles Clippers. Really big year. Offensively, really efficient. Led the Clippers to one of their best seasons ever. When you look at the lineup, yeah, pretty stacked. Had some really nice help there, but Kawhi had one of the most efficient offensive seasons he's ever had. He's had his best year since Toronto. He played the required amount of games. Injured at the moment. He's made the USA team. I don't know how long he holds out on that, depending on the injury. Kawhi injury management is just pretty much the story of his career and has been since 2018. Jaylen Brown, he had a really nice start to the season, but he's been really consistent throughout. Clearly the second best player there for the Celtics this year. I had him at 20 wins as well. And it's really hard for me to not have arguably the best duo consistently night in and night out in the NBA. Not both on the All-NBA team, and it's a big factor to his selection as well. But a really nice year for Jaylen Brown, who just continues to plug away. Him and Jamal Murray, built of the same cloth. It's going to be interesting to see how they both continue to push through as the understudies, essentially their own team. Sabonis was in and out of honourable mentions in the MVP race all year. For me, if this was all picked on position, Sabonis would have been second team. I thought he was the best. He was the second best centre this year that was available for selection, might I add. Otherwise, he probably makes the third team. I mean, if this was all based on position, I certainly would have Bam Adebayo sitting here in my third team. But you don't have to do it like that anymore. And that's why you're seeing pretty much an all-forward centre lineup here for my All-NBA third team. So Sabonis, the Kings, makes the nod there. Anthony Davis, I've touched on. And, of course, Kevin Durant, we've mentioned there previously as well. Durant scraping in to the third team. Over to the second team, and I think people are just starting to finally get the gist of everything now. Tyrese Halliburton of the Indiana Pacers, really big year for him, as outlined previously. Big year for Jalen Brunson. Steph Curry does make it, and again, it is a very tough one to sort of, understand and justify, because you are talking about a guy who didn't make the MVP conversation, but based on MVP criteria, I can't have him in my list. Certainly, based on All NBA criteria, I can have him in my list. And that's why I've got him on the second team. I think that's how good of a year he had. As I mentioned, Banchero, there's no doubt about it. He deserves a second team nod. Massive year for him and Orlando. And Anthony Edwards, the unlucky man out of that three that just misses out on the All-NBA first team. A massive year for him once again. Deserves the accolades, there's no doubt about it. And I think realistically, it's very hard for me to justify any of those guys being All-NBA first team when you look at what is produced there. The top five of my MVP is my All-NBA team. At fifth, I had Jason Tatum. At fourth, I had Giannis Antetokounmpo. At third, I had Luka Doncic. At second, I had Nikola Jokic. And first, I had Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. Pretty easy stuff to evaluate there. Anyway, guys, that's been me. That is how I saw the accolades and awards for the 23-24 NBA season. Stay tuned. I will have coverage of the playoffs as it continues to roll on through. There's still a lot of basketball left in the season. Anyway, guys, that's been me. I'm out.